Good morning, good mid-morning, good afternoon, whatever time zone you happen to be in. Would like to introduce everyone with great pleasure to Mark Phillips, a new friend that I just met. We got to talk a little bit before we got started, and I think all of y'all are really going to enjoy hearing all about Mark and his crypto story. And so, Mark, would you like to say hello to everyone?
Hey, good morning, Scott. Thank you very much for having me on the show. Hey, everybody. It's great to be here. Look forward to this conversation.
And so, Mark, basically what we do is I want to find out about the people in our community. And so, basically, this is all about who is Mark Phillips and how did you find crypto and where do you feel like we're going and how you feel about all of it. So, with that as a backdrop, just let everybody know who you are and how you feel about everything.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Um, I've like you, I'm also in marketing. I've been in public relations and marketing most of my career. Retired from the Air Force. I did public affairs for the Air Force. Went into nonprofits after that, doing public relations, marketing, and then came back to the government, and I work for the Department of Defense now. So my crypto story is I've always been a fan of technology and technological developments, coming out of the Air Force, which is a technological service. I'm always interested in new things that are coming out, and it's fascinating to me. So back in November of 2017, we've got grown kids, and everybody was home for Thanksgiving. And as we're sitting around, probably eating too much, my son and my sons-in-law, I overheard them talking about Bitcoin. And if you recall, that's when there was that was the start of a pretty significant bull run. And it was just getting into, it was starting to go crazy. And it was starting to get into the news, right? And so I'm listening to him and I'm like, I'd heard of Bitcoin but I'd not heard positive things. Right. Everything was, it's a scam, or it's, being used on the dark web and on Silk Road and to buy, drugs and weapons and things like that. And so I just steered clear of it. Right. Especially as a government employee. It's like, I don't want to have anything to do with that. Well, I'm listening to them and they're talking about not just Bitcoin, but what they called altcoins. And I'm like, And so I started asking questions, and then we started doing research. And long story short, the more research I did, the more I realized that it was a burgeoning, brand new ecosystem. And so I was around like you at the dawn of the internet. In fact, I built my first websites and web pages where we had to hand code back in 1994. So seeing, what happened with that, from hand-coded flat web pages to this crazy economic engine that we've got going now online, and then seeing what was happening with the emergence of cryptocurrencies just a few years ago. I mean, they weren't brand new, but they were new to me, and starting to understand the potential. I was like, wow, this is like the second iteration of the internet. And if somebody is able to get in on the ground floor, there's huge potential. So I got really interested. Fast forward to today, we're going on 3 years later, and like many people who dip their toe in this water, you start doing research. And so I've done several hours of research every day since then. The more I do, the more convinced I am that this is going somewhere, and it's going to be a seismic shift in the way we do business, the way we handle and think about money, the way that we interact. As significant, maybe more significant a shift than the emergence of the internet was. And so, there's a lot of danger areas that I think people ought to be careful of, but there's a huge amount of potential. So, I am every bit as excited today as I was when I first started hearing about it almost 3 years ago. And so here I am.
Wow. I got to be honest, Mark. I want to reach through and give you a big hug because when I hear people that seem to have seen exactly the same thing that I did, it's like I'm really not crazy. so thank you for that. And I couldn't be more. 30 some odd years ago, I stumbled across a book. I can't remember the name of it. I'll have to research and look back up again. But it was a book about paradigms, and when they shift, truth has three stages. First, it's ridiculed, then it's violently opposed, and then it's accepted as self-evident. And
absolutely.
And for some reason, Mark, I just got really fascinated in paradigms and trying to see how they form and how they come about. And if you can catch one at the right time. And I've been kind of like an amateur studying that for the last 35 years or so. I've never seen anything like this. I mean, the convergence of the Internet of Everything, of AI, of moving money as fast as we move data. I mean, bringing in 3.5 billion unbanked human beings into the new monetary system. I mean, it's just eliminating money laundering. I mean, it's just staggering.
It is tremendous.
Yep.
It is tremendous. Well, in fact, one of my daughters this morning asked me about, what I thought about the news stories about there being a shortage of coins, of change. Yeah. And I said, well, what do you think about it? And she goes, well, it is curious. Do you think it's because of the pandemic? And I said, well, maybe in part, but think about this. Think about it from a larger, more strategic perspective. If you're a government and making and replacing and handling money is expensive, and it's hard to track. So if you're law enforcement or a taxing authority, it's hard to track. And you had the opportunity to shift to something that is a lot more cost efficient to handle, a lot easier to track and tax, and a lot easier to enforce laws with. Wouldn't you want to make that change? And she said, yeah, that makes total sense. I said, okay, so if by maybe restricting the availability of change, quarters, dimes, nickels, and pennies, maybe you can kind of nudge people towards wanting to use something different. So, for example, you make less change available in the system. I'm not saying this is happening. This is just what it looks like to me.
Right.
But you make less change available in the system, and now banks don't have the change to give to their business customers, who then don't have it to give to their retail customers. And so I go in to buy a gallon of milk, and they don't have change to give me. Well, what do? They say, well, if you're paying cash, maybe you round up to the nearest dollar. I don't want to do that. I don't want to pay extra. So, okay, well, use your credit card or your debit card. Use a cashless system. Okay, I'll do that. All right, well, that's a subtle but profound nudge towards moving cashless without anybody having to outlaw cash. They just get us out of the habit of working with dollar bills and change. It's one step closer to going cashless. So anyway, I see all these, like you, I see all these shifts happening at the same time, and that convergence, and it seems to be accelerating. This seems to be a particularly important inflection point where all of these things are coming together, and they're coming together very, very quickly.
Well, and Mark, you seem to be a very open-minded person, and so as a person who respects that greatly, one of the things that I have I can't wrap my head around it, how we have ended up with having a maximalist attitude within the crypto world. And look, I own some Bitcoin. It was the first one that I bought. I saw it in about 2014. Watching it, I watched a Don Tapscott video about blockchain, and then a bunch of videos by Brock Pierce. And I saw it, but I didn't pull the trigger. I didn't wait. I waited until 2000, I think it was 17, and I bought my first Bitcoin at 15,000. But and then it fell, and then that's when about a year later, when it started going back up, that's when I ran into XRP. But do you understand how is it that people are finding the crypto world, but then they turn into maximalists? I can't understand the logic of being into crypto, but then being a BTC maxi. It seems like an oxymoron to me.
Yeah, it does to me too, Scott. It might be that it has something to do with how people come to this space, right? I didn't come in with any particular ideology. I certainly didn't come in with sort of an ideology that we were going to, or somebody was going to upend the banks or upend the government and replace all of that. But there are people who come with that worldview. And that leads you to seeing anything like, we'll take XRP, for example, but I think you could apply this to Stellar or Cardano or any number of other projects. If you come in with that ideological view, anything that looks like it's working with the establishment, that's working with the big banks, working with government regulators, probably is anathema to what you're trying to accomplish. So I get that rejection from those folks. The part I don't understand are the people who came in later who just see this as a really good opportunity to make some incredible returns on investment over time, why they would lock themselves into one particular camp or one particular way of seeing this. That seems tremendously self-limiting and short-sighted. So Look, I am as much of a fan as I am of Ripple and XRP, and I'm a huge fan. I try to keep an open mind to all the projects and what problems they're trying to solve, what their use cases and business cases are, and who they've got working on the teams, what partnerships they've built, what progress they're making. Look, I'm open-minded about it. If there's something that I think has potential for taking off, tell me about it. I'm interested. But like I said, almost 3 years worth of daily research and trying to understand as best I can as a non-techie what's going on and the potential for where this is going. There are some in my mind that stand out more than others, XRP being one of those.
And I feel exactly the same way. And VeChain is a good example of one that I took a look at and then invested in, because again, it makes sense. Having a better way to track the world's goods and services through the supply chain. I mean, a better way to track makes perfect sense.
That's right. That's right. If you're a grocer, for example, or a food producer, your worst nightmare is that there's some kind of outbreak, Listeria or E. coli or something like that, and you have to very quickly get ahead of it and be able to track back to the source. Well, what better way than to have it on the blockchain? It's all documented, it's all available, and if it's automated, that's the beauty of it. The whole thing can be automated and relatively low cost. Now you've just dramatically reduced some of the most significant risks to your business. Oh, okay. So if VeChain is one of the ones that can help solve that problem for global businesses, there's potential there. Is it going to be the end all be all of cryptocurrency? No, but I don't think there is going to be one. I think there will be many winners. So if that one has good potential, I'm interested. Tell me about it.
Me too. And Mark, if we could, if we ever do get to time travel and we could go back 20 years, would we want to buy Google, Facebook, Amazon, PayPal, or would we just want to buy Facebook? I mean, why would I not want to be able to diversify into a couple of different projects that were all going to make a significant amount of money? I mean, maxi thing just doesn't make any sense to me. Now, let me ask you this. Do you feel like, Mark, that Ripple was chosen? I've heard that as a theory, that Ripple was chosen and then they developed this ideology and technology, or do you think that they had it and then the government, the powers that be, kind of thought, well, we've got to find somebody to be able to implement the idea that we've got, and it looks like this Ripple thing looks like what we need? Do you, because DAI said before that he thought that they were either chosen or once they got started, they were picked.
Yeah. If you believe that there's sort of this secret group that, that's sort of orchestrating how the world operates and pulling all the levers and all that stuff, and is sort of all knowing and all powerful, then the being chosen kind of makes sense. I'm not of that mind. That gives people a whole lot of credit.
Yeah.
I don't think we're that smart or that organized. I might be wrong. I don't know. But in my mind, it's, and recent comments by David Schwartz have sort of supported this. At least I believe they have. So he recently was quoted as saying that that they had come up with a solution before they had a clearly defined problem. And the problem sort of emerged once they had developed the technology. And so this sort of initially niche cross-border payments, remittances problem is the one that they sort of gravitated to after they had developed the technology. I had never heard that before a couple of weeks ago. And so that sort of reinforced for me that they were developing a technology that was an alternative, maybe an improvement to Bitcoin, certainly moving away from proof of work to another consensus mechanism, and that its benefits or potential benefits were recognized, and then I think that probably opened the door for them to have really high level meetings with government regulators and international bodies like the IMF and major financial institutions like State Street and BNY Mellon and others. Somebody could argue the other side and say, well, look, how did they get their foot in those doors if they weren't already, sort of pre-selected? Here's the thing. None of us are ever going to know until decades down the road when the book comes out or the movie comes out. And quite frankly, from my perspective, it's really interesting, but it's not really important.
Right.
What's important is the fact that they have this protocol, that they have these partners, that they've been working with. I mean, Stuart Alderati talked about, and Ken, is it Ken Kirchner?
He's the guy who's the friend of the president.
Greg Kidd tells a story about when he first came on board. One of their first things to do was go talk to the government.
Yes.
Okay. Yep. So you've got an organization that has been making very deliberate efforts its whole, for years now, to be working with the government and working with the regulators, has been listening to, partnering with the major financial institutions on the government side and the commercial side to understand the problems that are their thorniest problems and developing solutions to solve those problems, building partnerships, building a stellar team, moving people out of Ripple and I think positioning them in other organizations that end up being partners with Ripple or other somehow operating in that same ecosystem and adding value to the ecosystem.
With an alliance.
With an alliance. Yeah, absolutely. And so that becomes, at some point, that becomes sort of this unstoppable juggernaut. So you got Ripple and you've got the Interledger Protocol and the XRP Ledger, and you've got all of these other organizations aligning themselves with this. And I see in your background, you've got the one of the NTT diagrams, which illustrates this point that that you've got this emerging ecosystem that if you're a part of it, it has huge potential. If you're not part of it, that's your choice. But going back to your original question about being a maxi, I don't know how you can look at this and go, that's not going anywhere. That's a scam. Okay. I mean, there's potential that it won't go anywhere. But if you're a betting person, and anybody who invest in anything is, you look at the odds and you go, wow, those look like pretty good odds.
Yeah.
Those look like house odds to me.
Yeah, and Mark, when I try to put the shoe on the other foot, because I own Bitcoin, and if it goes to $1 million, then John McAfee will be the happiest person on the planet. But I would like it to go there. I own some Bitcoin, but when I try in my own mind to make the case for it, well, it's using a lot of energy. Eco-friendly is kind of an important thing in the world today. The transaction times are long. The transaction fees are high. And the hash rate is mainly in China. I mean, if XRP had those characteristics, can you imagine the feeding feast of the negativity that would be coming down on us if we were saying we love Ripple, we love XRP, the standard, if we had those characteristics to try to defend?
Yeah, and we don't. We have the opposite. So look, I'm not trying to hit on or beat up Bitcoin. You know, people, it's a free world, it's a free country. You can invest in what you want. But my concern about Bitcoin are all the things that you just said. You just had the World Economic Forum at its last meeting talking about the importance of sustainability. And there are much more sustainable, much more energy efficient ways to solve the same problem that Bitcoin is trying to solve. You had the IMF coming out with similar statements more recently in response to the pandemic. And you've got sort of this concentration of hash power in one country. I understand it's sort of shifting to the United States now. But my concern about Bitcoin in particular is that, in my mind, it is one executive order away from being declared a national security issue and essentially outlawed. I don't want that kind of vulnerability. If somebody else is comfortable with that risk and feels like, you know, it's going to be a good investment for them, hey, go for it. I am not going to say anything bad about them, and I wish them well, and I hope I'm wrong. But in my mind, it is just too risky for me.
All right, so to shift just a little bit on adoption of cryptocurrency in the world as a whole, regulation in the United States seems to be a big deal. I mean, I'm sure you've seen, as I have, seems like that we're really gaining momentum in that area. How far away do you feel like that we are now from the regulatory clarity that we've all been hoping for?
With Brian Brooks' decision at the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency recently, in my mind, that accelerated things tremendously. Had you asked me this a month ago, I would have said, oh, several years. But between, I think there are several factors that are driving this confluence. So one is we've got this pandemic that we've got to deal with. So there's the health aspect, and there's also the economic aspect. We've got to have more resiliency in our economies. We've got somebody new at the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, with Brian Brooks being the acting director, who has very clearly said these can be decisions that he can make. They don't have to require legislation. They don't have to require anything other than an issuance from the OCC. And he has already started that process. We've got the election coming up. And so that is going to, I think, accelerate, because that, regardless of, you know, where you are politically, there's a stake in the ground in early November where there's going to be a vote. And so you've got people in the administration who are under some pressure to do something. You've also got the IMF, and this is 2020 is their 5-year time frame for declaring the new basket of currencies that will be part of the SDR for the next 5 years. You've got the World Economic Forum with their priorities that they've laid out. The UN has started to echo that. The World Bank has started to echo that. The IMF has started to echo that. And so all of these things are coming together. And in my mind, they point in sort of one direction, and that is adoption. Oh, you've also got the emergence of CBDCs. So you've got any number of countries. China's already rolling theirs out. A number of European countries are moving out on theirs. France has recently made an announcement. The EU has made an announcement. The digital dollar project in the US seems to be picking up some speed. And we also have probably some coming changes in the membership of the Federal Reserve Board. And so you add, yeah, absolutely. Now she's one Senate floor vote away from being a member. So you have all of these things happening at the same time, with all of those pressures coming at the same time, and you ask yourself, okay, what can the people in positions of authority in these different organizations do to address these? And a lot of that comes back to moving to a cashless society, adopting CBDCs, and adopting the regulatory structure and systems that will allow digital assets to flourish as an extra component to this economy. And I can't see it not happening. In my mind, it's something cataclysmic would have to happen for this not to come through. Now, does that mean it's going to be XRP? Not necessarily, but I think the odds are heavily stacked that it will be, that will be a major player.
The one area that you, as you were going through the cavalcade of the wonderful things that we can say and look at what is happening, you failed to mention one of my favorite areas that are who I call the standard in our influencer community is Crypto Eddie. But what about SPI in Asia? I mean, Mr. Powell is not stupid, and I think he really gets crypto and XRP.
I think when the book comes out or the movie comes out down the road that tells this story, he is going to be a major player. So I and from my little limited view of the world, I think there will be technologists, like David Schwartz and Arthur Brito and others who made all of this possible and had this sort of incredible vision for what the technology could do, and brought that to life. But I think there are also financial strategists like Mr. Cattell who take the technology, see the real potential, and start to build the institutions to make that a reality. He is a major mover and shaker, and frankly, had it not been for Crypto Eddie, we wouldn't know any of this, because if you're not living in Japan and sort of immersed in that world, as Americans, we probably would be completely unaware of what he was doing until it rolls out, and then we say, where'd that come from? But in reality, he's been moving behind the scenes, making these things happen for years. So I think he will come out as one of the true visionaries that brought this new economy to life.
And Mark, I don't know if you spend any time looking at the USA debt clock every now and then when I feel like I'd like to make myself.
Oh, that's depressing.
Every now and then, I've got nothing to do. I think I'll get nauseous. Okay. So I look at that. One thing 2 months ago, and this is the only thing I wanted to touch on with this. But 2 months ago, for 3 months, I've been telling people, look, it's not the $27 trillion on the balance sheet on the left that is the real problem. It's this $153 trillion of unfunded liabilities that we have, $1,000 of unfunded liabilities per citizen. And so do you see, like I hope you do like I do, that we have no choice, that we have got to do something. The Fed is not going to print us out of this problem.
Yeah, no, we've seen
no way. We've got to do something.
Yeah, I think we've seen plenty of examples through history, from Weimar Germany and their hyperinflation to through other countries all the way up to Venezuela now. You can't print your way out of debt. You can do a reset. Countries have done that before, where you switch to a different currency, you peg it to something that is an external neutral reference point, that then prohibits you from being tempted to continue to try to print your way out of debt. But at some point, you actually have to deal with it. And back to your point about the debt clock, if you look at the upper left-hand side of that page, you just see sort of the top line numbers. But if you look at the lower right and you look at the total obligations, I don't know how we pay that off. And printing more money doesn't do it, right? So how do you get out of that without destroying the value of the currency, without defaulting? And since you've heard the old saying that that the world is so connected to the U.S. economy that when the U.S. economy gets a cold, the world sneezes.
Yeah.
Okay. So we can't default without major economic ramifications rippling, pardon the use of the phrase, rippling throughout the world. Okay. So what else can you do? Well, you got to do something. And, Brad Kimes and other folks have talked about, ways to collateralize the debt and move back to, in Judy Shelton's terms, a gold standard, or something like a gold standard in a cryptocurrency sort of way. I think that's the quote. Yeah. So you could do that. And there are ways, I think, that they could do that without devaluing the dollar, without defaulting on our debt. And it's not just devaluing the dollar. It's as a nation, we have a strategic interest in making sure that the dollar continues to either be the or a world reserve currency, that there is tremendous value to the U.S. economy and U.S. political power in having that kind of leverage. We don't want to move off of that. In fact, we might not be able to move off of that. But you look at it and you go, okay, so these are some more of the factors of confluence. Right now, the debt, or the interest rates globally, are exceptionally low. In many countries, they're already in negative territory.
Right.
One of the reasons that's so critical, I mean, that causes big problems, but one of the reasons it's so critical is once interest rates start going up, if all you could afford to do was pay the interest on your debt, when the rates start going up, you can't even afford to do that. I'm not even talking about paying down the principal. So if you look at our obligations, all we're doing is paying interest. We're not paying down the principal. And if the rates go up, we can't even afford to do that without printing more money and devaluing the dollar. Okay, so it's a catch-22, right? So how do you get out of this without violating any of those things that are critically important? In my mind, there's only one way to do it, and it's go back to some sort of standard, and maybe it's not just for the U.S. Maybe it's for the G7, the G20, and then if everybody goes to a similar kind of system, then it might be possible to wipe out some of the debt by paying it off with whatever the new currency is. I mean, you keep the fiat currency, but you have this other one. Say it's an SDR. And this starts to sound, I know, tinfoil hatty, but
actually it doesn't to me. So if you're wrong, then we're both nuts.
Okay, so maybe it's a crazy idea, but I've not heard anybody come out with an alternative that solves this problem.
Yep.
Maybe there's one. There are a lot more smarter people in this world than I am. And so maybe somebody's come up with something and they're moving forward on it, and it will solve these big problems. And I hope that would be wonderful if they do. I've not heard any evidence of it. So at some point, all these issues become critical, right? And they have to be dealt with. I don't know of any other solution.
Well, again, I couldn't agree with you more. And so do you think when Brad Garlinghouse said that last October that we were in about the third mile of this marathon, do you feel like that all of the beer cold event, pandemic event has accelerated everything? And how far along do you think we are in that marathon now?
So to answer your second question, yes, I think it's accelerated everything.
Me too.
Do I think it was planned? No, I don't think it was planned. We had, if you look, just go on Wikipedia and look up epidemics or pandemics, and you'll see that throughout human history there have been epidemics, and some of them have been just crazy severe. So like the Black Plague wiping out 60% of the European population. Okay, that's really severe.
Yeah.
So that's part of human history, right? So you don't have to create one. You can just wait for one to come along, because they come along frequently. I mean, there are many more than I was ever aware of until I looked it up. But I do think the result is that it has accelerated things. So are we on mile 2, mile 3? I have no idea. I have kind of shifted my thinking. I know Brad Garlinghouse and others have used the metaphor of crawl, walk, run. And I don't think that's actually what we're doing now. I think, and I'll use just a different analogy, instead of, sort of a baby learning how to crawl, then learning how to walk, and then learning how to run over the course of years, I think it might, to me, it looks more like what's actually happening is it's, instead of crawl, walk, run, it is like we're getting ready for a sprint at a at a track meet, right? So if you're getting ready to race, before you get in the starting blocks, what do? You stretch, you warm up, you jog a little bit to loosen up, right? You test out, you warm up the muscles, you loosen up your joints and all that stuff. In this case, it's, you get your systems in place, you get the technology in place, you get the partnerships in place, you test the systems, and there's evidence that some systems have been tested. So if you see like transaction volumes going up and dramatically and then dropping right back down, that sounds like, to me, it's either a glitch or a test, and it's most likely a test. Again, they're not going to tell us. There's no obligation to tell us publicly, who's testing what behind the scenes.
Right.
And in fact, it makes sense for them, for whoever's doing it, to not tell us, because you wouldn't want to give away a competitive advantage, right? They're businesses.
Right.
So if you're basically doing the financial system equivalent of stretching, loosening up, warming up your muscles, and getting ready for the race, then at some point you get in the starting blocks, and the starter says, runners, take your mark, and then they fire the starting gun and it goes. That's what it's starting to look like to me. Again, I might be wrong, but if you look at sort of the prices, and I think the price isn't really important, other than it's an indicator of demand, or indicator of demand versus supply. Given that we've got a fixed supply, in my mind, it's an indicator of demand, and demand hasn't skyrocketed yet, which tells me we're certainly not running. We're probably not walking. We might not even be crawling. We might just be sitting in the blocks waiting to go. But I believe we've warmed up. I believe we've stretched out, we've limbered up, and we're now in the blocks and ready to go. And I think the runners take your mark command from the starter might have been Brian Brooks' pronouncement that it is now legal, clearly legal, for federally chartered U.S. banks to custody cryptocurrencies. I think that was the runners take your marks. Now,
that's
when
music.
does the firing gun go off? I don't know.
That's music to my ears, Mark. So do you think that XRP would be defined as a currency? And I remember Chris Giancarlo saying that recently, defined as a currency. But do you see that XRP would be used as a bridge currency, or as a currency itself?
I think that might be a false dichotomy. I think the design is for it to be used as a bridge currency. That
Right.
as you have all these CBDCs, they're walled gardens, as
Right.
you have all these banks creating their own tokens like JP Morgan coin, those are walled gardens. I think you'll ultimately see companies having their own, cities and states maybe having their own for their own jurisdiction. Colleges maybe having them. If you go to college, instead of having your card to swipe to when you go to the cafeteria, or to spend at the bookstore, you might have the in this case the App State coin.
Go
But
Mountaineers.
those walled gardens all require bridges to be interoperable, right? And so XRP is a wonderful solution to that problem. That doesn't mean you can't use it for other things too, that you couldn't use it as a currency in its own right. It also doesn't mean that it can't be a store of value. And so I'm going to go back and pick on Bitcoin again for just a second.
Okay.
So it's for the folks who are Bitcoin maximalists. Nobody talks about it being used as a means of transaction anymore. They talk about it as a store of value. Great. If it functions as a store of value, that's awesome. But store of value is in the eye of the beholder, right? So if from my perspective, something holds value, maintains that value over time, for me, that's a store of value. But it only works as a store of value if it works as a store of value, and ideally, if it works better than anything else that I have available. Historically, gold has been a really good store of value. As demand for other coins like or currencies like XRP go up, and the price goes up and stays up and is essentially stable, and I don't mean that it doesn't continue to go up, I mean that it's not wildly fluctuating up and down, that de facto is a store of value. So something's not a store of value because somebody claims it is. It's a store of value because it works that way.
Right.
Right. So the evidence is you can't just say it's a store of value, and it is. Gold is a store of value because of its properties, right? And it's the fact that we as human beings have decided that this really dense yellow colored metal is going to be especially valuable. If we had not decided that, it wouldn't be. It'd just be, sort of an interesting oddity that you find in the ground. But there are plenty of others that we don't consider stores of value. So I think one of the things we will see is ultimately XRP will be seen as a store of value in addition to a means of transaction, in addition to a bridge technology that enables a bunch of other economies.
And Mark, if that happens, then I believe that the value will have to go up because of the scarcity, which is all, as a holder of XRP, makes me smile.
Yeah, absolutely. People laugh at this notion that there are 100 billion, and that seems like such an enormous number that it could never go up in value because there are so many and you could never have scarcity.
Right.
Well, that's only relative to the amount of demand.
Right.
So if you're solving global problems and it's used in business cases around the world and at scale, that 100 billion is relative.
Right.
So the 100 billion might actually be scarce enough to drive the price up. And in fact, the price has to be a certain level for it to function efficiently.
Well, and I believe one of my most entertaining interviews that I got to do was with Naga Bo, who has kind of come in our community I love that guy. I love that guy. And his he wants the bank money to come in. And one of the things that has been the most irritating in my crypto experience is my dad and my stepmom have a traditional financial broker. And as I have tried to begin to share with them, and then they run everything past him. And he works for one of the bigger institutions. It doesn't really matter what name it is. And I don't want to get in trouble by mentioning the name and getting sued. But I believe now that Brian Brooks said what he said, I think that
Yeah.
that guy now, and Mark, when the traditional investment advisors, financial advisors say, hey, I think we need to diversify 1 to 5% of your portfolio into this
Yep.
new asset class. Do you
Yep.
feel, you see that the same way? And do you believe that that is a lot closer now than it ever has been?
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. And the proof is going to be when you get the call from your financial advisor, when you get the email or the snail mail from your bank or your brokerage house that says, hey, you can now get into this thing, and we're advocating diversification into this new asset class. That's going to be the proof. DAI has for years talked about that it will, once the financial advisors have figured out how to get paid, that's when the floodgates open. So I think there are two parts. That's part of it. But the first part is once it's clear that it's not going to be deemed illegal, right? Once it's clear that the banks are not going to get slapped for doing this, and investment houses are not going to get slapped for doing this, that opens the door. Once the financial advisors understand how they're getting paid, and their employers understand how they're getting paid, and they've started to create these investment products around this, and the pitch decks and their marketing plans for how do they roll this out, that's when it opens up, and that's when you get the institutional money in. It's not just reaching out to us as individual investors for our for our 401ks or our IRAs. It's the pension funds for for firefighters and police and teachers and pick any industry or any union, right? Once those guys start getting in, that's the big money. So the other part is if you're a bank, for example, and you're seeing what's happening, are you going to sit there and say, okay, we're going to custody this and shepherd some of our investors, some of our customers to invest in this, and not buy some yourself? If you believe that this is the future and it's going to go up in value, are you going to buy and hold some yourself? I mean, as the head of the bank and also as the bank. If you see it as a good hedge and a good investment, are you also going to buy some in addition to driving your customers there? And I think the answer is yes. So again, all of that starts happening at the same time, which then creates, headline worthy stories like, a new market cap record for XRP or for the whole cryptocurrency sector. And then you start to see it picked up on CNBC, and Jim Cramer starts talking about it on Mad Money, and Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times and other mainstream financial news publishers start to cover it. Then you kind of have that FOMO rush that comes in. That drives more money into it, which adds more liquidity into the system, which enables more efficient operations and more investment. And so then I think that's what kind of gets that flywheel going that we've heard referred to. What do you think?
I believe it's coming. And when the day that my father calls me and says, you know what, Scott, Rob just recommended that we diversify 5% of our holdings, I don't know what I'm going to do, Mark. But I mean, that's one of the things that I'm really looking forward to. And I like what DAI said yesterday in a video that I watched, and it may have been the day before. But get that digital toolkit that Grayscale sent out, Barry Silver sent out, and send it to your financial advisor and say, hey, you evaluate this and tell me what you think about it, because these guys might not hear about it And if we don't go ahead and get proactive and begin to work that strategy of mass adoption, let's try to educate, as we have all educated ourselves, educate our financial advisors and say, hey guys, you might want to take a look at this now.
Yeah, I think there's value in that. I do believe in the power of enlightened self-interest. And so these guys are profit driven. They might be more profit driven than anybody else on the planet.
True.
And so I can't believe they're not paying attention to it, and don't know what's happening. And I don't mean necessarily the individual financial advisors, but I mean the institutions that they work for.
Like, so in other words, you're saying Jamie Dimon is really not as dumb about digital assets as he may have been leading on?
You don't get to be that rich and powerful for that long by being dumb, right? I might not agree with every decision he makes or Warren Buffett makes or anybody else, but you got to respect them for their intelligence and their insight, their foresight. And so they might be a lot of things, but they're not dumb. And right. So I can't imagine that they're not paying attention to this and aren't positioning themselves to be able to take advantage of it as quickly as they can. The other thing, and this is frankly really exciting to me, is every time there's been a new opportunity to make money in a big way, there's sort of this rush into it. And, so we saw it in the gold rush in the Old West, right? We saw it in Oklahoma with the land, with the Sooners and the land rush. And I think we're going to see it. We actually saw it in the emergence of the internet and the .coms in particular. And it can lead to some busts and it can lead to bubbles and all that. But in the end, even after you have that pullback, you still are further ahead than you were to begin with, ultimately. And I think we're going to see the same thing. Is you're going to see so much money rush in that some of the prices are going to go crazy. Some people are going to make really poorly informed decisions and are probably going to lose a lot of money. Because if you look at the landscape of cryptocurrencies, for example, there's getting close to 6,000. Most of those don't have a use case. There's no business reason for them existing other than to make their founders money.
Right.
And so I think those are going to eventually go away and take a lot of people's money with them if they've invested blindly. But I think there is a smaller group, a much smaller group that are solving real world problems, that have solid businesses behind them, that are building those partnerships and have real potential. And so the people who invest in those, I think, are going to do exceptionally well. It's like going back in the time machine and buying some Amazon stock when it was pennies on the dollar. Right. I think that's where we are right now.
And so, Mark, as we wrap up, three things. Number one, I forgot to mention four things. Anything that I have to say, not financial advice. I'm just a interested observer of our XRP army and everything that's going on in the space. And I forgot to, at the beginning, to sincerely thank you for your service, because Scott,
thank you very much.
You're welcome, Mark, because the only reason that Scott Powell is free is because of people like you that spent your life in the military providing the freedom. I'm a leadership junkie, and one of my favorite people to listen to regularly is Jocko Willink. Mm-hmm. And I am deeply indebted to our military and the service, and I understand the sacrifice that all of you have made, and I sincerely thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Scott.
You're welcome. Second of all, I hope that you would send a brief little message out to everyone that I have been asking and inviting to come on and speak with me. And if they're hesitating at all, what would you encourage them, DAI, Sam I Ham, and other people in our community, and especially the women? because I have really been going out and trying to find as many of our women to come on and share their story, because I want to have a catalog of stories. So if you have a housewife you wanted to introduce the digital asset class and XRP to, if you had a story by another woman, another housewife, she's going to relate to that other housewife more than she is DAI. So
sure, absolutely.
all of the people that I'm encouraging to come on and share their story with me in this setting like this, would you encourage them to go ahead and do that, so we can do our part to help with the mass adoption by having as many of these stories out there as we can get?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to. I think that's important.
So to all of them, Mark, what would you say if I'm inviting them? Should they come on and share their story?
I would say yes, absolutely. Don't be scared. Scott's a great host. He's got a great show, and it's easy. And it's here's the thing I think that might be a little bit of a barrier to a lot of people if they don't see themselves as experts in this. And I certainly don't. I am an interested observer, but I am in no way an expert. So don't let that stop you from having a voice in this community. That you have every right to have a voice in this community as anybody else. You have an opinion, you're paying attention to the news, you have your own viewpoints, share them. And we all come to this in different ways. So that's important to share as well. So I would say yes, if you have the opportunity, come on Scott's show and share your story.
And also to the some of the other influencers, we all know how much we appreciate them. Would you like to be able to hear a little bit more? For example, would you like to hear a little bit more about DAI, not just his reporting more news stories for us?
Yeah, sure. One of the things that's fascinating to me, and I think it is to you as well, is how people came to this space. So, right, you might have a family member like I did tell me about it, or you might see it on the news, or you might, at some point, you'll have a financial advisor tell you you ought to be paying attention to this. But how we come, and the fact that it's sticky, right? It's not just, oh, that's interesting, and we go away. But it's sticky, and it's sticky for each of us for different reasons. But I think there's also commonalities in our experience that, might be helpful for people to know that there are other people who are sort of in the same space that they are, and are having the same questions and having the same conversations with their family and friends. And I've got friends who I've told about this, and they're like, okay, that's interesting. Stop talking about that, please.
Yeah,
You're making me uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Put your tinfoil hat away, and can we talk about something normal? And I'm like, okay, that's cool. I just want to be able to look back and say, I made sure that you were aware of it. I'm not trying to convince you. I'm not trying to, get you to open your wallet and do anything, because, I don't have a financial interest in what you do one way or another. But I don't want to have a conversation with the people that I care about years from now and them say, why didn't you tell me? If you knew all this and you saw this, why didn't you tell me? I don't want to have that conversation. So, and I know there are other people that are out there that see this the same way. And so hearing these similar stories from other members of the community, I think is incredibly important and powerful.
Very well said. And so the last thing I would like to do is offer you an invitation at some point to come back. And the reason is I like compare and contrast. So, I mean, if we got together in a month and we could say, hey, remember July 31st? And now look, look.
And you'll say, you were totally wrong.
Yeah, or we were totally right, or how exciting was what happened yesterday was. Because again, what I'm trying to do is to develop friendships, because after we moon, I believe if we can develop a community of well-funded, like-minded people, and then guess what? Everything is tokenized. Well, then let's go find some stuff to invest in together. But we're not going to able to do that, Mark, if we don't get to know each other and to be able to identify the people who are like-minded, and then we'll be well-funded. Because again, everybody can have a great idea, but if you don't have the money to start the business, what difference does it make? So
yeah, that's absolutely right.
I'd like to offer you the invitation to begin to come back, because what I'm hoping is that we have begun to develop a friendship now, not just that we had, a one and done conversation and see you later.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that'd be great. I appreciate that, Scott. I'd love to come back.
Okay. And I had one quick thing I wanted to mention to you real quick after I turn the recording off, which I'll do now. And I would like to thank you again sincerely. I will say this to everybody that I've interviewed, everybody that I hope to interview, hope I'll be able to say the same thing. Our conversation and getting to know you, Mark, exceeded my expectations. And I thank you for taking the time to be able to share some of your day with me today.
Scott, it was a pleasure, and I appreciate the opportunity to get to know you better and to have this conversation within this community. Thank you so much.
All right. Take care, everyone.